Hello, and welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. This is episode 1 of season 3, sort of an intro episode, right? This episode is basically going to be a recap on industrial hemp. What it is, what it's used for, why it's a big deal, why we should be growing it in great quantities. Well, first off, hi, my name is Eric Hurlock. I am the host and producer of this podcast. I'm also the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper. We're a weekly farming newspaper based in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Our newspaper covers agriculture in Pennsylvania and around the northeastern United States. We've been publishing weekly since 1955. We have a really loyal subscriber base. People love us for our agricultural journalism, as well as for our classified ads and market reports, and just so much more that we pack into this newspaper every week as we cover the farming communities, here in Pennsylvania and around the area. I like to call Lancaster Farming Newspaper the connective tissue among the farming communities. So anyway, I have been publishing this Industrial Hemp Podcast since August of 2018, and I've been covering hemp for the newspaper since the summer of 2017, when I attended a field day at the Rodale Institute in Berks County, Pennsylvania. The Rodale Institute was one of a handful of permit holders in Pennsylvania that year. That was the first year that hemp was allowed to be grown in Pennsylvania for generations. So I knew a little bit about hemp back then, but I have learned a great deal more since I started making this podcast. I knew some basic stuff. I knew that it was related to marijuana. I knew that the Navy used it to make rope, and that, the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper. And you hear stories like George Washington grew hemp and Thomas Jefferson grew hemp. So I knew that hemp was woven very intricately into the creation myth of America and played a very important role in our past. From what I've learned over the past few years of making this show, I'm now more convinced that hemp has an important role to play in our future as well. For many reasons, too. Economic, environmental, health, wellness, lots of stuff. And we're going to talk about a few of those things a little later on. But basically, I have been talking to literally hundreds of people in the hemp industry. People in government, politicians, policymakers, business leaders, capitalists, entrepreneurs, farmers, builders, university professors, artists, historians, doctors, all kinds of people who are connected to the hemp space. I've had a front row seat watching as this industry puts itself together, how it deals with challenges, how it finds solutions. By making this podcast, I've come to know the people in the industry. And it's these people, these relationships that keep me coming back. These are the people that are standing the industry up, and their stories are so inspiring. So what I'm setting out to do here is to explain what hemp is and why it has such potential, and why all of these people are, working towards something. What are they working towards? Well, that's what this podcast is about. For you regular listeners, maybe this would be a good episode to share with your non-hemp friends and family to help them see what the fuss is about and why there is a growing contingent of like-minded people who are so passionate about this plant. Ready? Okay, here we go. What is hemp? Well, hemp is a plant grown from a seed. Humans have been cultivating it for thousands of years, possibly longer. Archaeological evidence shows that hemp has been used as a source of food, textiles, medicine, building materials, rope, paper, and much more over the course of human history. These days, most people know about hemp because of its relationship to marijuana. They say things like marijuana is hemp's illicit cousin. But the truth is, hemp and marijuana are the exact same plant. They are both cannabis sativa L, or more simply, cannabis. Hemp and marijuana are two different varieties of the same plant. Just like ghost peppers and bell peppers are two varieties of the same plant, or how cauliflower, kale, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts are all varieties of, the brassica plant. Human beings are very good at manipulating the genetics of plants to get desired results. We've been doing it forever. Think about corn, potatoes, tomatoes, basically all the plants that we eat. They've been modified through strategic or accidental plant breeding. It's no different with hemp and marijuana. but people get really hung up on the marijuana aspect. And honestly, I wish you would all just cool your jets about marijuana. Because look, yes, marijuana is amazing. It's a medicine. It can be used as a spiritual tool, a recreational drug, as whatever. And that's all fine and good. I am not anti-marijuana. I'm just super pro hemp, right? Because marijuana to me is a distraction from the real paradigm shifting potential of industrial hemp. Marijuana is not going to move the needle on climate change. It's not going to pull carbon from our atmosphere the way that industrial hemp can if we do it right and grow it at scale. Let's back up a little bit. Yes, the climate has always been in flux. Climate change is a natural phenomenon. Climate change killed the dinosaurs. Climate change caused the ice age. Climate change killed the woolly mammoths. But what we are dealing with now is of our own making. This is not up for dispute, regardless of your personal feelings about climate change. Since the Industrial Revolution started around the end of the 18th century, humans have been spewing the byproducts of said revolution into the Earth's atmosphere. And by byproducts, I mean greenhouse gases, which trap heat from the sun and warm our atmosphere, and they raise our ocean temperatures, change weather patterns, melt ice caps, which raise the sea level, all of that stuff. And yes, like I said, our climate is always changing, but in this case, it's been changing really quickly, and the scientific evidence shows that it's directly related to human activity. But I'm not here to debate climate change with skeptics. My goal here is to show how industrial hemp and agriculture in general can be one of our greatest tools for climate change mitigation. What does that mean? Well, to mitigate means to lessen the effects of something. Large-scale farming of hemp can lessen the effects of climate change. That's my message. Marijuana isn't going to do it. Growing CBD isn't going to do it. But large-scale production of industrial hemp for fiber and grain can. There is a great quote by an energy expert and climate advisor by the name of John Holdren. And this sort of sums things up for me. He says when it comes to climate change, we basically have three choices: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. We're going to do some of each. The question is what the mix is going to be. The more mitigation we do, the less adaptation will be required, and the less suffering there will be. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. I am a human being on planet Earth. I have children. I have friends and family and animals. I love this place. The world is beautiful. It's so complex in its systems, so beautiful and worth fighting for. I want the earth to be a livable place for future generations. We took this beautiful miracle of a world, and in a very short time, we made a mess of the place. We should be ashamed of ourselves, and we should be doing everything humanly possible to fix the problem. Maybe it's too late, but if we don't try, then we don't deserve this place. So, all right, I'll climb off my soapbox a little bit, but just know that's my soapbox. Hemp, to me, is connected to climate change mitigation. So it's hard for me not to be cynical about the reasons we found ourselves in this predicament. Sure, you can talk about how the Industrial Revolution and all of the technological breakthroughs that came with it have improved the quality of life for the average human being. But yeah, okay. I think really the cause of the environmental destruction at the heart of that is greed and the chasing of short-term profits. And so part of the paradigm shift that I am fighting for here is also a change in how we think about the future and our relationship to it. All right, first things first, let's talk about carbon sequestration. What does that even mean? Well, carbon sequestration is the act of capturing and removing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it somewhere besides the atmosphere. Plants do this really well. It's called photosynthesis. That's how they feed themselves. They pull carbon from the atmosphere through their leaves and turn it into food. The carbon gets locked up in the soil and in the plant material. All plants, as far as I know, sequester carbon on some level. Some plants, however, are really good at it. And that's where hemp comes in, because hemp is one of those plants that sequesters carbon really well. How well? Well, according to carbon researcher Ben Dobson, An acre of industrial hemp can remove somewhere between 7 to 11 tons of carbon from the atmosphere. Roughly speaking, Dobson says, if this country did 50 million acres of hemp, we would be sequestering a couple 100 million tons of carbon per year on that acreage. Ben Dobson, by the way, was a guest on our show last year, and we talked all about this. So anyway, he says 50 million acres of hemp. Think about that. That sounds like an awful lot of hemp, right? But when you consider that we plant some 90 million acres of corn and almost as many acres of soy here in the U.S., you can start to see the feasibility of 50 million acres. And if you consider that we grow more than 500 million acres of corn worldwide every year, you can start to see that 50 million acres is really just a drop in the bucket for what's possible. Hemp doesn't just put the carbon in the soil, it also stores carbon in the plant material itself. And we can use that plant material as the raw ingredients for many of the things that we make, things that we now source from oil or timber. I'm sort of a simpleton, but it seems to me that the answer to most of our problems could be solved by growing our raw materials in farm fields rather than drilling for oil and cutting down our forests. I think it's that easy. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The world has a lot of problems, and we can farm our way out of most of them if we do it right and do it at scale. Okay, so let's say we grow 50 million acres of hemp. What are we going to do with it? And this is where it gets fun. Hemp, as I mentioned earlier, has been used around the world as a raw material for thousands of years, and yet we are still finding new ways to use it. We'll get into some of the uses of hemp here in a bit, but first, let's talk some modern history. So everyone loves a redemption story, right? And that's what the story of hemp is. At its core, it's a redemption story. So hemp was outlawed and vilified, and generations grew up thinking that this plant was bad news, but it turns out it's good news. And the good news is that hemp can help us heal the planet, heal our communities, and heal ourselves. So back in the 30s here in the U.S., the growing of hemp was essentially shut down by the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which tried to restrict the recreational use of marijuana. But because there was no real good way at the time to differentiate between hemp and marijuana, hemp production suffered, and basically hemp production was shut down. And the difference between hemp and marijuana comes down to the level of one chemical compound in the plant called tetrahydrocannabinol, or simply THC. This is the active ingredient in marijuana. It's responsible for the psychoactive effects. But it wasn't discovered and isolated until 1964 by an Israeli chemist by the name of Raphael McCollum. 1964, coincidentally, was also the year that Bob Dylan introduced the Beatles to marijuana, thereby changing the course of modern music history. But I digress. The discovery and isolation of THC in 1964 would ultimately give us a way to separate hemp from pot, eventually resulting in the U.S. federal government's creation of a legal definition of hemp, which goes something like this. The plant Cannabis sativa L, and any part of that plant, including the seeds thereof and all derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, acids, salts, and salts of isomers, whether growing or not, with a delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. All right, there you go. That's the federal definition per the 2018 Farm Bill. So what does it mean? Well, it means that any cannabis plant or material with more than 0.3% THC is marijuana, and anything with 0.3% THC or less is hemp. So what this means in practice is that hemp growers are on the hook for proving to the government that they aren't growing marijuana. Hemp farmers have to test their plants periodically throughout the growing season to make sure their crops are within the legal limits. And these tests are not cheap. They add substantial cost to the cost of production of hemp. Hemp farmers are also required to pay a permitting fee. They have to get extensive background checks and get fingerprinted by the FBI every year. We are essentially treating our hemp farmers like criminals. Or potential criminals, which in my opinion is a bit excessive, especially when you consider that marijuana itself is legal for either medicinal or recreational use, or both, in all but 11 states. So it makes me wonder what the fuss is about. We should be making it easy for farmers to grow hemp, not making them jump through hoops and waste a lot of money on unnecessary permitting fees and testing. You don't need a permit to grow corn or soy. Let's let hemp compete on a level playing field. So let's talk about the various parts of the plant, and then we'll get into the different uses of those various parts. So you've got the roots, the stalk, the leaves, the flower, and the seeds. All of the parts of the plant can be used, even the roots, which have some medicinal properties that help with joint pain, gout, inflammation, things like that. I'm not too interested in the hemp roots because personally, I think we should leave the roots in the ground. We'll talk about regenerative agriculture and no-till practices in a bit, but if you're pulling the roots up out of the ground, you're putting carbon back in the atmosphere. As for the leaves and flowers, I think it's pretty well known what they're used for, right? That's where the medicine is. Cannabis produces chemical compounds called cannabinoids, and I think they've identified well over 100 different cannabinoids, and they each seem to have different properties and effects on human health. The most well-known cannabinoids, of course, are THC and CBD. I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I'm going to give this a shot. So these cannabinoids play really nicely with our bodies. In fact, researchers have discovered that we have an endocannabinoid system in our bodies. Our bodies produce cannabinoids and they help regulate our bodies. We have these two main endocannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2. And so when we ingest cannabinoids from the cannabis plant, they work within this endocannabinoid system and help promote health in our bodies. Right, so yes, the chemical compounds found in hemp and marijuana are powerful medicine, and I have great respect for the medicinal power of cannabis. However, I am more interested right now in the industrial applications of the hemp plant. And the parts of the plant with the biggest potential for industrial use are the stalks and the seeds, the fiber and the grain. All right, so let's look at the stalk. Let's see what's going on here. So hemp stalks have two main parts. There's the fiber and the hurd. The fiber is sort of the outside of the stalk, and the hurd is the woody, fluffy inner core of the stalk. There's tons of uses for the fiber, and I'm not talking about like crazy pie in the sky stuff here. This is real. The uses of hemp are real. There are people right now out in the world making all sorts of things from hemp, not just rope, but textiles for clothing, paper, biofuels, insulation, wood substitutes, car parts, surfboards, ukuleles. Heck, I talked to a guy in Florida who made the body of a sports car out of hemp. The possibilities are real and nearly endless. Yeah, so there's people out there right now in the world doing these things. This isn't some pipe dream about hemp will save the world. This is people out there in the world now building businesses, building networks, figuring out how to grow, process, and utilize this hemp. It's happening now all over the world. For example, in Kentucky, there's a company called HempWood, and they press hemp into boards, and then they make that into flooring and other sorts of wood substitutes. I've been to that factory. I've seen it. Greg Wilson is the owner of it, and he says it's a carbon negative facility because they use their waste products to heat their kilns and things like that. It's just like, to me, it's like it's a new type of thinking, a new approach. It's the paradigm shift, and it's happening there at HempWood. There's a company in Idaho, Hempitecture, making bat insulation from hemp that's going to replace the pink fiberglass crap that's in your house now. The automobile industry is using hemp. BMW creates some kind of non-woven fabric for their car doors. And I talked to a material scientist at Ford Motor Company a couple years ago, and she told me that the auto companies they want tons of hemp because they know they can do all sorts of things with it, but they just can't get the supply that they need right now. So once the supply is there, you're going to see just a big shift in how big companies manufacture the things we use. There are just so many different applications for hemp. I mean, think about all the cardboard and paper we use. To feed our paper habits, we cut down something like 18 million acres of trees each year. Think about that, 18 million acres. We're cutting down trees faster than they grow back, and we need those trees. They play a role in the health of our planet. Do the math. We're going to cut them all down just so we can wipe our butts. It's not okay. I've read somewhere that 1 acre of hemp can make as much paper as 4 acres of trees. Let's do that instead. And I think about how easy it would be for, one of the world's billionaires, let's say Jeff Bezos, just how easy it would be for him to declare that Amazon is going to start using hemp paper or hemp cardboard for all of its packaging, or maybe even a percentage of its packaging. Overnight, with, a policy decision, Jeff Bezos could jumpstart an industry and just make things happen in a way that, people who aren't billionaires can't. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. So there's lots of uses for the hemp fiber. Okay, that's, like I said, the part that's on the outside of the stalk. Inside the stalk is the hurd, also known as the shiv. And you can also make paper from this. You can also use this as a building material. Yep, it's called hempcrete, and basically they mix the hemp hurd with a lime binder and some water. They mix it together. They either spray it onto a frame or pack it in molds, and it turns into, this like permanent plaster type thing. It's not structural, but you could do your whole house with it. It would replace drywall and insulation and all of the things that you build your walls out of now. I know a hempcrete builder here in Pennsylvania who does amazing work all over the place. He imports his hemp from France right now because they actually have a more advanced hemp industry than we do. But I know that he would love to source his hemp domestically, because really that's what it's about with hemp, is that things need to be local. Because hemp is such a sort of light and fluffy material, it's expensive to ship it great distances. Right? But if you were to grow the hemp locally, process the hemp locally, manufacture it into things locally, you could have these regional, I don't know what you call them, regional supply chains. Every region of the country should have hemp processing plants and manufacturing, and we could take care of our needs locally. Right? We saw during COVID just how fragile these global supply chains are. You get, like an infectious disease or maybe some terrorism. You get whatever, maybe weather-related problems, and our supply chains come screeching to a halt. So having localized supply chains is smart. It's one of the ways we have to retool our world, and hemp plays right into that. Before we get into the discussion about hemp grain, you should also know that the hemp fiber and hurd can be used to make things like bioplastics and polymers and composites. There's just a lot to do with this versatile material. And a few months ago, I was talking to Nick Walters from the National Hemp Growers Co-op, and he's involved in a research project around renewable natural gas. And the research that they've come up with says that hemp has the potential to produce 208 million BTUs per acre. And that's the equivalent of 60,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, enough to run a clothes dryer 24 hours a day for 27 months. So think about that. There's just so many implications there. These are exciting times to be living in. Our world is going to change drastically over the next couple of decades, and we want it to change in positive ways. And I am hopeful that the people in this hemp industry are the ones that are going to help us move it forward. All right, so that's the fiber and the hurd, but what about the grain of this plant? So the first thing you need to know about hemp grain is that this plant loves to produce seeds. There's a USDA report from last year that says that hemp can yield over 2,000 pounds of seed per acre. That's a lot of seed. And it can be planted and harvested just like other grains, right? It's just like the people who already grow grain know how to do this, and hemp would very easily just fit into their normal farming operation. They grow a ton of hemp grain in Canada. It's been legal up there for over 20 years. Here in the U.S., obviously, it's been a lot fewer years, but we could grow some serious grain here. But why do we want to grow the grain? What is it good for? Well, just from a human health perspective, check this out. Hemp grains are rich in protein, fiber, and fatty acids, amino acids. It's got an amazing omega-3, omega-6 profile. It's generally known as a superfood, right? And what can you do with the hemp seed? Well, you can crush it for oil. So it produces a really rich, lovely oil. And then you have a cake byproduct that you could feed it to your livestock if it were legal. I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, hemp as a food, it's rich in protein, so people will make protein powders out of it. You can get hemp milk from it. There's hemp flours. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with the seeds. It's literally a superfood. Hemp has what's known as GRAS status from the FDA, generally regarded as safe. So yeah, you can feed hemp grain to your kids and to your grandmother and to everybody except your animals. So currently it is against the law to feed hemp grain to livestock. You could feed it to them. They'll eat it. They love it. It's then illegal to sell that meat commercially. So that's kind of a problem, because if the hemp grain was legal for livestock, it would open up all kinds of markets, because the grain producers need a place to sell it, and you could really easily sell it into the poultry feed market. You could feed it to all sorts of other livestock. Right now, there are efforts in various states trying to make this happen. Here in Pennsylvania, there's a company called Kreider that got special permission to feed hemp grain to their laying hens. So there's a brand of eggs called Chickies Creek, and they're hemp-fed eggs. And they've got a really good nutritional profile, high in protein, high in the omega-3s and 6s. Just like I said, it's really good. But also, like I said, it's currently illegal federally to feed hemp grain to livestock. There are smart people working on this, trying to figure out how we can open up those livestock markets. They are working, through the channels of government, working with the FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine that oversees these livestock feed requirements. Also, AAFCO, the American Association of Feed Control Officials, something like that. So, it's coming along. It's moving very slowly. Check out the hempfeedcoalition.org for more information there. Apart from, the feed and the food applications, the hemp seeds can also be used for varnishes and paints and soaps and body care products. It's a very versatile ingredient. You can use it for lots of different things. There's also a lot of talk of dual purpose crops, where you could grow the cannabis plant for the grain, harvest the grain, and then harvest the stalks for other things. That's happening. People do that. In fact, the company out in Montana, IND Hemp, they started off as a hemp grain company, and they were growing grain and processing it. And then their farmers were like, hey, what am I going to do with all of this straw left in the field? And so now they also process the hemp fiber. And that fiber is being used for things like animal bedding. And it's actually going to Idaho and being turned into the hemp insulation that I mentioned earlier that's produced by Hempotexture. So it's all coming together. IND Hemp has built this great big production facility out there in Fort Benton, Montana. I've been there myself a couple of times. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's real. And bringing this processing plant to this small town in north central Montana has started to bring life back to the town. This little town, people were leaving and not coming back. The school classes were getting smaller. And now here's this hope on the horizon. It's IND Hemp, and, they are bringing jobs back to this town. So there are many benefits to industrial hemp, economic benefits, right? Like bringing jobs back to America. People need good jobs. They need jobs with dignity. I think we can rebuild the middle class here in America with industrial hemp. There's so much promise. There's something for everybody here. All right, so where are we now? We've talked about the various parts of the plant. the industrial applications. We talked about the people making it happen. And that's basically what this podcast is about. I talk to the people who are making hemp happen. I am not a farmer. I am not a hemp expert. I am not a business owner. I'm just a guy with a podcast, a journalist at a small, regional, rural, agricultural newspaper. But I believe in farmers. I think farming is the most important job in the world. So much depends on our farmers. Yes, obviously for the food that they produce, but also for the fibers and the fuels. And they steward our land. Our farmers play a huge role in our daily lives, and most of us just take it for granted. And so now with industrial hemp and carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation, our farmers have another role, a very important job to do. And I think we need to make it easy for our farmers to save the world here instead of making it more difficult. So we need sensible regulation. We need to sort of get out of our own way and make this easier for farmers. But it's not just as simple as like letting the farmers have it. To do this right from a carbon point of view, from a mitigation point of view, we need to tinker with the farming practices a bit. Right? Steve Groff, the cover crop coach here in Lancaster County, explained it to me pretty basically what happens when you plow a field. Right, so there's carbon in the field, in the soil, and then you plow it, right? And when it comes in contact with the oxygen, what happens? The carbon molecules bond to the oxygen molecules and it creates, you guessed it, carbon dioxide. And so every time you plow a field, you are putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So thankfully, we have this thing called regenerative agriculture, full of all kinds of great practices, one of which is no-till farming. It's not the right solution for every farming application, but we need to work on that, right? We need to get our farmers into no-till farming. So if we can grow 50 million acres of hemp without disturbing the soil, that's even better in the long run. All right, I just threw 50 million acres out there because of the numbers that Ben Dobson mentioned earlier in the show, but I think we can grow a whole lot more than that, right? But we have to do it with these regenerative agricultural practices in mind. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Obviously, I didn't cover every aspect of the hemp industry here, and I know I oversimplified some things, but like I said earlier, I'm not an expert, but I am interested in this industry, and I am paying attention to its development. I've been interviewing people about hemp for over 4 years, and all of those interviews can be found at lancasterfarming.com. I will put some links on the show page for this episode to direct you to some of those interviews that I referenced. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of season 3. I promise you I will not be talking this much in future episodes. Usually what I do is I'll do a little introduction and then there'll be like a sponsor message because this show is sponsored. I have sponsors because that's how I'm able to continue to do this. And so you'll hear a little sponsor message and then I have a segment that I call Hemp News Nuggets, and I'll read some headlines and tell some stories about what's happening in the hemp space. And then it's an interview show. It's like Fresh Air with Terry Gross, except it's with me and it's about industrial hemp. And each week I'll talk to somebody in the hemp space. It might be a farmer or a builder or a politician or a scientist or an inventor or somebody doing something interesting in the hemp space. So welcome back to the show. Welcome to season 3. As always, if you have suggestions for people who I should talk to or stories I should cover, you can always get in touch with me by email. You send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. So I hope you enjoy the new season of our show. It's going to be relatively similar to past seasons. I'm probably going to throw a few curveballs in there, here and there. Like one topic of interest lately for me is artificial intelligence and like that intersection with humanity. I'm sort of fascinated by that ChatGPT. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's this artificial intelligence thing. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like Google on steroids. You can go there and ask it questions, and I asked it to write me a 16-line poem about hemp in the style of William Wordsworth, and a second later it gave me this. In fields of green the hemp doth grow, a plant of many uses we know. From fibers strong to oils divine, this crop doth have a purpose fine. With roots deep in the earth below, it reaches for the sky to grow, a crop of industry and gain, but also one of health and pain. In garments made and ropes so tough, this plant doth serve us well enough, but also for the mind and soul it doth a medicine make whole. And though some may it still decry, we'll sing its praises to the sky, for hemp is more than just a plant, it's a gift from nature grand. So let us use it all it's worth, and show the world its true worth, for hemp is more than just a crop, it's a symbol of progress non-stop. So yeah, how about that? ChatGPT writing us a poem about hemp. So yeah, it's going to be a fun season here on the show, and I'm glad you're with us again. I've taken a couple of weeks off. Actually, this is our first episode of the new year. The last episode I published was back in mid-December of 2022. So we're off to a good start, a little slow start, but we're getting there. Some of the things that I've been busy with, I've been thinking a lot about neuroplasticity and our ability to sort of rewire our brains. And I'm trying to put that to practice because I've taken up the fiddle just a few weeks ago. So I'm trying to rewire my brain to see if I can learn how to play some of those reels and jigs. So yeah, so you might be hearing some of the fiddle on the show, and I hope you don't mind. What else? So I did mention on those last couple of episodes that the music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tinbird Shadow, and it turns out that's my little music company, Tinbird Shadow. It's not really a company, it's just a name that I've given to me making the music here for the show. So I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, my name is Eric Hurlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. This podcast has come a long way in the past 4.5 years, and I'm just so thankful that I get to do this work. I'm thankful for the people in the hemp space. I am thankful for our farmers. And I am thankful to Lancaster Farming Newspaper for letting me continue to do this work. So, all right, until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
Season 3, Episode 1 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2023 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. That's my dog, Willie. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by yours truly, Eric Hurlock. And the music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tinbird Shadow. And all the barking is courtesy of Willie the dog. Oh, and a special shout out to my colleague at Lancaster Farming, Candace Wiersbowski, who listened to an early draft of this episode and provided some helpful feedback. Thank you.